on. Welcome to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is the Liberty Hot Seat. We're at tinychat.com/talkingliberty at libertychat.com. Thanks again to Ian Chaffee, is that how you say it? For giving me a show. Thank you very much. Close enough, he says. All right, well, sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, this is the show. Later on during it, Stefan Molyneux will be here to talk about, I don't know, I guess it depends what I ask him. Libertarian type stuff, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, here's the show. I guess I better figure out what I'm going to talk about to kill time for the next half hour. Before the interview starts. Sorry, I really didn't have that much time to prepare, or I guess I did, but I didn't use it. Well, and you know, I don't want to talk about what I want to talk about because I kind of want to save that to talk about with the guest coming up. And that's the Arab, don't know what you call it, spring or summer or something. Let's see, there's plenty going on in the world to cover. Let's try to kill a little time here. I'm sort of afraid, but went ahead and hit refresh on antiwar.com. You see, now look at this. Appeals court unblocks indefinite detention law. This is so funny. You know, somebody just sent me on my Facebook page. Someone sent me this thing. NDAA detention provisions struck down by Obama-appointed judge. And this is basically the theory that Obama is against the NDAA use the military to arrest American citizens provisions that he specifically insisted would be in the bill that he then signed. And that this entire process of him appealing the decision, the continued decisions against him, is simply him trying to exhaust all of the appeals so that in the off chance that Mitt Romney wins, he won't get this power. Man, that Barack Obama must really love you. And now, to be fair, I actually didn't read the thing, but that's what the guy said it said, and it sounded plausible enough that that's what a liberal would write, doesn't it? Well, anyway. Here, judge grants Obama Department of Justice request to suspend the case against the NDAA. By the way, chat room guys, feel free to chip in wherever you want, and, you know, interactivity and all that Web 2.0 crap. And also tell me, how's my audio? I noticed on the playback last week that, well, Tom Woods and I attempting to talk at the same time sure did not work out at all. I'll try to be very careful not to step on Stefan Molyneux tonight. But I wonder about the rest of the audio quality. Am I too high? I guess. It sort of looks like I'm up the tiny chat color-coded thingamajig as it is. Maybe I should turn it down a little bit. Oh, they say audio's good. All right. Anyway. Okay. News.antiwar.com. Judge grants Obama DOJ request to suspend case against NDAA. The government had been granted a stay in the case, challenging the constitutionality of indefinite detention provisions in the NDAA. A federal appeals court judge granted the government's request to suspend a federal judge's ruling last week that permanently enjoined a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act, empowering the government to indefinitely detain suspects in the war on terror, even American citizens. Congress passed the NDAA last year, which includes provisions codifying indefinite detention for individuals suspected of allying with or supporting al-Qaeda or its affiliates. Judge Catherine B. Forrest on Wednesday last week blocked the government from enforcing those particular statutes on grounds that they violate constitutionally guaranteed rights to due process, in a case brought against the government by journalists and academics, including Chris Hedges, Daniel Ellsberg, and Noam Chomsky. The Obama administration immediately appealed Forrest's ruling, asking for an immediate stay or suspension of the case's proceedings. When Forrest denied the request, the government went to the Second U.S. Court of Appeals in Manhattan and asked another judge for an emergency stay, which Judge Raymond J. Loyer granted on Monday. Quote, the motion Justice Department lawyers filed is significantly overwrought, sensational, and teeming with arrogance, writes Kevin Gostola of Firedog Lake. Quote, it perhaps affirms the worst fears of the plaintiffs, who decided to bring the lawsuit months ago. In effect, Gostola continues, the government is arguing for the power to make the decision to detain a person and put them in prison without having anybody whatsoever question their power to do so, because the country is in a state of perpetual war. It is essentially an argument for the power to be able to populate internment camps whenever necessary. The government's primary argument against the plaintiff's case is that the provisions in NDAA don't offer the government any more power to detain individuals than are already present in the authorization for the use of military force. A joint resolution passed by Congress 3 days after the 9/11 attacks authorizing the use of force against those who carried out the attacks or allied with those who did. The Obama Justice Department says that since Congress codified already existing practices, the AUMF, into law, the NDAA, it should be clear the NDAA doesn't grant any new powers that can be challenged. But the question here is, why insist upon the detention provisions in the NDAA? If the NDAA provisions merely reiterate already existing statutes, then the government should be happy to allow the federal injunction to block enforcement of the provisions and just keep using the old laws they used prior to late 2011 when the NDAA was passed. Clearly, NDAA does grant the government new powers of indefinite detention without charge or trial. NDAA contains language that is very vague about who can be detained and for what. Those who substantially supported, directly supported Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces, including American citizens. As the plaintiffs put it, the act improperly authorizes that civilians in the United States be detained indefinitely by the military, that they be tried by military commission or military court, and that they may be subject to removal to other jurisdictions in violation of Amendments 5 and 6 of the Constitution. Yeah, me and my Roman numerals. And the act fails to give reasonable notice of the acts and conduct that will render a person liable to military detention, and is overbroad, thereby chilling and impinging upon protested, expressive, and associative acts. The stay that was granted on Monday essentially suspends the case's proceedings until a full 3-judge motions panel can consider the matter on September the 28th. The chances that the full panel will be as bold as Judge Forrest and exercise the court's responsibility to check the power of the executive branch is not high. Indeed. And so, yeah, there you go. Well, isn't that interesting? I guess I don't understand the legalities there. If they want to cite the old authorization to use military force, that this NDAA supplants, improves upon, with exactly that language, substantially supported, directly supported, or the Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda can mean Al-Shabaab in Somalia, right? Or associated forces, right? Which means anybody that they want to point their finger at. And, you know, Chris Hedges is one of the plaintiffs here, a former New York Times reporter. I'm pretty sure he feels bad about it, but he helped lie you into war with Iraq, claiming that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were working together in the New York Times. But anyway, he's been a war reporter for decades, and he has interviewed, of course, he says, you know, just in his own, on his Rolodex or whatever, he's got all these guys from Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Qaeda, real Al-Qaeda guys. And so does that make him an associated force? If he reports what they say, and then later some neocon says that it was valuable to that terrorist that he was able to have his words reported somewhere, then does that mean that Chris Hedges has provided material support to them? Or, you know, Noam Chomsky, who would point out that the best way to win the war on terrorism is to stop creating terrorists by killing and oppressing people and hiring torture dictators to torture them to death. Which you could spin as a very conservative American nationalist approach. How best to protect America? Stop creating more terrorists with all your American violence. However, we all know what they think about that over at stupid Glenn Reynolds' blog, right? Or in the Department of Justice. From their point of view, recommending against their policy that they have decided is best for you and best for us. Undermines that policy. Puts Americans in danger. You see how easy that is? That's what John Ashcroft said, right? Anyone complaining that the Patriot Act eviscerates their Fourth Amendment, why they're complaining about of lost liberty, the language of the treason charge, the only crime defined in the Constitution because they were trying to limit its application. But anyway, by the way, if you actually were an American citizen and you actually joined up Al-Qaeda to wage war against the United States, then they already have a treason charge for that. Telling me a federal court can't handle a treason charge? Only a military court can? What sense does that make? Why do they even have treason in the Constitution or in the federal law at all? And in fact, you look at Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, who was an American. I don't think he was an American. Was he a citizen? I think he actually was, right? A naturalized American citizen. And then went to Pakistan, saw the consequences of the drone strikes over there, and joined up the war on the other side. Came back to the United States to attempt to wage war on behalf of the Pakistani Taliban. It was not alleged that he had hooked up with any Egyptians or Saudis in Pakistan, but just the Pakistani Taliban. And that they were the ones who had failed so miserably to teach him how to make a bomb, thank goodness. But anyway, for his act of attempted terrorism in Times Square, why wasn't that treason? Waging war on America on behalf of foreign power, whatever. I'm not a nationalist, I'm just saying. And in fact, what do they charge him with? He pled guilty to charges of domestic terrorism, which is, guess what, a crime in America. They already have cops for that. Yeah, they wear blue parkas. Sometimes. I guess if you're lucky, they're wearing a blue parka, right? And they arrest people and they prosecute people on terrorism charges all the time. So why in the world would they need these provisions? Even if they wanted to pretend that the language of the original authorization to use military force was that broad, which it never was, and even the Republicans, they backed down rather than let the Supreme Court hear the Padilla case or the Almari case, where in both those cases, Padilla was a U.S. citizen, Almari was a U.S. person, both of them arrested on American soil and turned over to the military. And the Bush, even, John Yoo and David Addington and them said, we better look out because the Supreme Court ain't going to let us get away with this. So they went ahead and indicted both of these guys in regular civilian court. So the Republicans recognized that they didn't really have this authority. They wanted to get away with, having George Tenet torture Jose Padilla in his brig for as long as they could. But when it came down to the possibility that the court would actually review what they had done, they backed down and indicted him in a regular court, regular federal grand jury in Miami. Prosecuted him, not for a dirty bomb plot, not for an apartment building bombing plot, but no, just for knowing a guy who knew a guy who talked about sports on the telephone, and we're pretty sure what he meant was send some money to Chechnya. Yeah. Boy, what a dangerous guy that Jose Padilla, especially after they MK Ultra no-touch tortured him right out of his mind. But of course, it's not hard to find 12 idiots from Miami who will, sit there and convict whoever they're told. So you mean it was a lie, an outright damned dirty lie that, in fact, you tortured out of Binyam Mohammed, that Jose Padilla was ever going to set up a dirty bomb, huh? Oh, well, don't worry, we'll go ahead and convict him for whatever you say, boss, said 12 idiots from Miami. What, he talked about soccer on the telephone? Well, that's a pretty un-American thing to do. It must have been code for terrorism. And anyway, We're just talking about this on my other show today. There are 50 cases of outright, forget about it, entrapment. Terrorism entrapment cases since September 11th. 50 of them. And there are another 300 or 400 of these cases that are completely bogus anyway. Where maybe it's not entrapment, but it's still a guy who was facing life in prison who's just making up lies now that he's flipped and turned state's witness. You know, like the Detroit Five. Something like that. They weren't entrapped. It was just some liar lied all about them. And the government ran with it, even though they knew it was lies, because they're liars too. And have you ever heard of a single one of these guys being acquitted? The best argument the war party ever had for we have to have military trials for terrorists is that one of these guys that they prosecuted for the Cole bombing was only convicted of one count when they charged him with 100 counts or something. He was convicted of one count. Well, maybe they just, hadn't done a good job convicting him. In fact, there was more to that case, and I don't remember what the hell it was anymore. But that was the thing. We're like, oh my God, he could have been acquitted. Yeah, well, murderers get acquitted sometimes. Maybe if you hired competent people to do your prosecuting, that wouldn't be a worry. But what's the Democrats' answer to that? Well, don't worry. If he'd been acquitted, they said this at the time in the Post. If he'd been acquitted, we would have abducted him and held him for the rest of his life in military detention anyway. For the young people listening, you might not know this, but I guess this goes to show how old I am now. Back a long time ago, in the olden days, when people said, hey, this is America, what that meant was, in a word, more or less, you can't do that. Now, you've probably never heard, hey, this is America used in that way before. That they used to be the one place on earth where, hey, you can't do that. But anyway, not no more. All right, well, what a shame. And, they've done this before. And, I'm trying to remember. It was somebody in the chat room maybe help me out. What's the Supreme Court case after the Civil War? I always want to say Quillen, but is that right? Something like that. It's right on the tip of my brain, man. It's not McGillicuddy, but something like that. McGilligan? McGillis? Or Gillis or something? Damn. Anyway, there's a Supreme Court case from right after the Civil War that said, hey, you can't do that. And it wasn't just, hey, Abraham Lincoln, you can't suspend habeas corpus, only Congress can, which is what it says in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But they also said, even the Congress can't, as long as the civilian government and the civilian courts are open for business. Which is an interesting turn of phrase, isn't it? But as long as the civilian courts are open for business, you cannot use the military power to abduct Americans. And like it says in Article 1, Section 9, only Congress can suspend temporarily the writ of habeas corpus in the event of an invasion or an insurrection. Now, joining up a foreign criminal terrorist plot doesn't count as either. But anyway, there's no such thing as the law. Sometimes they have to pretend there is and refer to it a little bit, but Franklin Roosevelt knew that his mass abduction of Japanese Americans and Italian Americans and German Americans to some degree, to a lesser degree, during World War II was criminal. It was in direct violation of that Supreme Court decision. But of course, to FDR, the Constitution was a brand new Constitution. He accomplished his revolution within the form. And he could rewrite it to say whatever he wanted. And remember now, in the 1980s, there was Operation Garden Plot, Cable Splicer, Rex 84, and all of that crap. Read your Covert Action Quarterly about it. And that was a plan by the Enterprise, I guess is what they called it, right? The parallel government created during the Reagan years to run the Iran-Contra operation. And they had a plan where if they could succeed in escalating the war in Nicaragua and in El Salvador, I guess particularly in Nicaragua, enough that they could actually send in American ground troops, then what to do about all of the expected protesters here in the United States? Answer: suspend the Constitution, I guess all of it, and put them in camps. And that was reported on June the 7th, I believe. Isn't it June the 7th? That's one half of my brain asking the other half. I believe it's June the 7th, 1987 in the Miami Herald. You can read all about it. And I guess, let's see, I got the clip here of Jack Brooks, don't I? This is a short clip, 1 minute long. Oh, no, you know what? Well, I'll try it. If it starts echoing and playing back weird, then I guess I'll cut it. But the music played right, didn't it? Ex parte Milligan, says Sebago. Thank you. Milligan is the case I'm referring to, where the Supreme Court said you can't do that. But that doesn't matter anymore. George Washington, back 250 years ago or whatever, 240 years ago almost, banned torture. And yet somehow the CIA used razor blades to get Binyam Mohammed to pretend that he and Jose Padilla had a plot to enrich uranium by swinging it around in a bucket over their head, and that they were going to set it off in the United States and kill Americans. So, you know, it's not like the law means anything or anything, but I just think this is interesting. Cast of characters real quick. You won't even hear Colonel North speak, or his lawyer who whispers in his ear. The footage is from The Panama Deception, which is a great film. It's narrated by Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched, and I urge you to watch the whole thing online for free somewhere. It's available. But this is, what you'll hear is Jack Brooks, who's a sick, evil pig, and it's a good thing that he's dead. He's better off dead, this sick pig. But anyway, he was a Democrat from Texas, and so in this case was pitted against Oliver North. And then the cover-up senator is another Democrat, Daniel Inouye from Hawaii. Now, Brooks was just in the House, but this was a joint committee of the House and the Senate on Iran-Contra, talking about Operation Garden Plot, Rex 84.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster? Mr. Chairman.
I believe the question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir?
I was particularly concerned, Mr. Chairman, because I read in Miami papers and several others that there had been a plan developed by that same agency, a contingency plan in the event of emergency that would suspend the American Constitution. And I was deeply concerned about it and wondered if that was the area in which he had worked. I believe that it was, but I wanted to get his confirmation.
May I most respectfully request that that matter not be touched upon at this stage. If we wish to get into this, I'm certain arrangements can be made for an executive session.
Yeah, there you go. And then who knows whether they ever talked about it in secret after that. I don't think they did. I don't remember anybody saying they ever did. But anyway, so there you go. That's just a short clip of that. You can read all about that, again, in the Miami Herald. I'm sure you can find it reprinted all over the friggin' place, right? I am failing. Here we go. I'm no longer failing. I was failing to tag Stefan Molyneux in this Facebook thing here. Didn't I interview Stefan Molyneux? And then the web address would be libertychat.com. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with Stefan again. I think I've only interviewed him the one time. I met him a couple of times at various conferences and whatever. Nice guy. Extremely libertarian guy. He'll be joining us here in just a few minutes. Well, looks like he's already joining us here. from what it looks like in the chat room. All right, now let me say real quick then, before we bring up Stefan, that Ayman al-Zawahiri recently has put out a podcast or two proclaiming that all good suicide bombers go to Syria, which makes him a good Democrat. And I think it's hilarious, and I think that maybe you will also think it's hilarious if I was to point out to you that the criticism from the Romney campaign, particularly from Paul Ryan, is that Barack Obama is not doing enough to, one, fight the al-Qaeda terrorists in Libya, that he just fought a war for, and two, he's not doing enough to fight a war for al-Qaeda Mujahideen warrior dudes in Syria. And in fact, if you go back and look at this statement from, I think it was just 2 days ago, Paul Ryan actually said all of this in one sentence. And I believe the way it was constructed, it did not even require a comma. This is what the Republicans have on Barack Obama. He just doesn't kill enough. He just doesn't fight Ayman al-Zawahiri's war for him enough. Except when he does, like in Libya, but never mind that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm stuck in the wrong dimension. Because I could see how maybe where the dimension where I'm really from and I'm supposed to be living my life, where things are really evil and wrong. But they're not just so ridiculously stupid, you know? Did I get stuck in the ridiculously stupid dimension or something? You know? How in the world could this terrible attack have taken place on our guys in Benghazi, you know? Where our ambassador to Libya and two of his bodyguards and another assistant of them, that they all four of them lost their lives there. Well, the most obvious explanation is that Ayman al-Zawahiri, this very same Ayman al-Zawahiri, said just before that attack, he eulogized a guy named Sheikh al-Libi, from Libya, who the Americans killed in a drone strike in Pakistan. So, you fight a war against al-Qaeda in Pakistan, while you fight a war for al-Qaeda in Libya, then guess what? Your friends that you're surrounded by in Libya, they like their fellow al-Qaeda warrior dude that you just killed in Pakistan better than they like you. Next step, smoke inhalation. Get it? And why did they even fight a war in Libya in the first place? Well, I called it because it was the only answer that made sense, and I'm real smart. But then later, I think it was at least partially verified by the reporting of Michael Hastings. And I really should have had him on the show and asked him to verify my point of view here, what he said. I don't know. But you can read his piece, which is not his best work, but still. It's Michael Hastings and Rolling Stone on Libya. And it's not about the Libya war. It's about the decision-making process in the White House and inside the national security state on whether or not to do Libya. Of course, Robert Gates, the holdover Republican Secretary of War, was against it. Right around that time, he was saying anyone who wants another war in the Middle East or in Asia, anywhere, ought to have their head examined. Well, I don't know. I guess they figured Libya was far enough west. It don't count, even if they're Arabs. Something. I don't know. But anyway, the part of my awesome theory that was confirmed in that article is the part where Hillary Clinton says, you know, we really got off on the wrong foot with this whole Arab Spring in Egypt and Tunisia. And we need to try again. Now, here's the third big revolution breaking out, third big protest movement breaking out in Libya. And Muammar Gaddafi, we only just brought him in from the cold. And yeah, he liked to shake down American businesses a little bit more than they're used to for their oil concessions. And he wasn't, ordering, enough attack helicopters and armored personnel carriers for his death squads, or paying for them on time, or whatever kind of thing. So they decided Gaddafi's expendable enough. Half of America still has a Go Kill Libyans t-shirt left over from the 1980s. And so we'll make an example out of him. That Uncle Sam is on the side of the little guy. You know, free markets and democracy and all of that crap. Just like Bill Clinton. Just like George W. Bush claimed in exporting their empire. And so that was it. And the most easy to, it wasn't just so obvious, it was so easy to digest, so easy to repeat, so obvious for anyone in the world to say and observe and share the information with anyone off the cuff. Just look. America backs every dictatorship in the entire region, except Iran, where they stole their country back from our puppet dictatorship back in '79. And Syria, where, well, they used to belong to the French, and we're working on a regime change there, too. Every other king and emir and sultan and pretended president and prime minister and potentate in the entire region is an American sock puppet torture dictator, and everyone knew it. So they said, well, let's try to confuse the issue. We'll have a war in Libya just to confuse the issue. And say, look, Uncle Sam is taking the side of the little guy. And, yeah, we can drive the Chinese out at the same time, too, maybe. All right, so that's all I got to say about that. Keep your eyeballs on antiwar.com. John Glazer and Jason Ditz, they're keeping track for you. They're doing a hell of a good job, too. All right, and now it looks like we're joined on the phone, on the line, on the chat machine, something or other, somehow, by Stefan Molyneux. Welcome to the show, Stefan. How are you doing?
Good. I really like the way that you describe your technical setup. I can tell that you are really just the pretty Miss America in front of the camera, while all of the busy beaver nerds are making it all work behind the scenes. Talk into the chat box to my head thing.
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry, I missed about half of what you said there.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just missed that first statement. You're a little low on your volume there, Stefan.
Oh, let me see if I can up it a little. No, I'm too scared to up it. I don't know this interface either, but can you hear me now?
Yeah, you sound quite a bit better. Well, and I just turned you up in the room, too. So, yeah, in the chat room, they say they can hear you now.
Good. All right.
Okay. So let's try that again. Welcome to the show.
Welcome. I was just commenting how, given the way that you talk about the technical setup, you are clearly the Miss America puff piece up front, talking head, just designed to look pretty while all of the technical beavers work under the desk.
Yes, exactly. I have, you would not believe the number of interns running around here making everything work for me. It's incredible.
So you're saying you have interns under the desk. I believe you could be a president.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I focus mostly on doing my hair, and I let everybody else take care of everything else.
And that guy had a $300 haircut. This is back when $300 meant something. Right now.
Yeah, which has been not too long, actually. It's amazing how quickly you can debase a dollar. But anyway, so Freedom Domain Radio. Tell us real quick, for people who aren't familiar, all about Freedom Domain Radio. What's that?
It's one syllable less. It's Free Domain Radio. It's, I guess, been around for 6 or 7 years. It's the biggest philosophy show in the world. We just did 250,000 downloads last week. I mean, we're tracking over 45 million downloads or something now. So, yeah, I do this philosophy thing. I used to be a software entrepreneur. I used to be an actor. I trained in theater and dance and all that kind of funky stuff. And now I yammer incessantly at a microphone and beg for change from passerbys. It's Socrates with some technology. That's really what I'm aiming for.
Okay, now in the chat room they're saying our levels still aren't right, so I'm trying to turn me down a little bit, but I'll ask you to try to turn you up a little bit more still, and hopefully we can get a good balance here.
All right, so I will try to move the mic a little bit closer.
Okay, and I've turned myself down here just a little bit, so I hope that helps too, guys. Chat room,
all right,
guys.
So I am now very close to French kissing my microphone.
All right.
Closer.
One day I'm going to figure out how to turn off the bleeps and bloops, but keep your volume. But I guess today won't be the day. Someday soon. Let me ask you first of all about what you think of the latest round of protest. I saw somewhere they said, well, it's the Arab Spring turns to summer. It started out kind of inward-looking revolutions and rebellions and protest movements against dictatorships in the region. It seems to be taking a much more anti-American focus now. What's your read on the situation?
Well, American foreign policy, by fairly conservative and independent reports, has been responsible for the deaths of about 30 million people overseas since the Second World War alone, and a large proportion of those have been Arabs. I don't think that the average Muslim or the average Arab in the Middle East is anti-American. That's like saying that Jews in a concentration camp are anti-German. No, they're kind of anti-being in concentration camps. The Muslims in the Middle East are kind of anti-getting bunker busters shoved down their chimneys every third day. They are anti-having their children vaporized in front of their eyes. They are anti-U.S. weapons being sold to the dictatorships which rule them. They are anti-wars of imperialism, wars for resources, propping up of dictatorships, overthrowing democratically elected governments. They are like I mean, without some of the nobility, but they're like the French resistance fighters. Were they anti-German when they were resisting Germany after May of 1940 through August of 1945? No. They were anti-getting the crap blown up out of them, anti-torture, anti-murder. And, of course, the view from inside the empire is always radically different from the view outside of the empire. Inside the empire, it's like we live in this biodome, and they have all of these wonderful images and screensavers being projected up on the biodome, like that Jim Carrey movie, you know, like all we see are these entertainments and this loveliness and this patriotism. And, I mean, you don't see what is going on outside the biodome of propaganda. You don't see. I mean, this war has been going on for over a decade in Vietnam. Sorry, in Vietnam, but I repeat myself, in Afghanistan, and 8 or 9 years in Iraq. And have you seen one body of anyone, one piece of blood, one piece of shrapnel, one human shadow against a wall from a rocket blast? Have you seen one casualty in the press? There's no censorship. They can print whatever they want. They will not get thrown in jail. They will not get fined for showing the body of one person who has died of the million Iraqis or so who have died and the millions more who've been displaced. Have you seen one body? No. I mean, we're living in this complete fantasy bubble world where the guns that are regularly pounding the outside world, we don't even feel the recoil. We don't even hear the trucks driving up the ammunition refills. We don't see any of it. And then we just wonder why people out there just seem to be, so kind of negative for us. I mean, it's diluted beyond words.
Yeah, you know, it's funny when you say that. It reminded me of a time, I guess, maybe 4 or 5 years ago where it could have been Reuters, but I think it was the AP printed one picture, not on TV, of course, but in a newspaper, printed one picture of a dying Marine bleeding. And it was a far away picture, too. It's not like a good close-up of his face and he's screaming for his mother or something real like that. It was he could have been a cardboard cutout as far as how well in focus he was and how far away the photograph was taken and the rest of it. And it caused a huge outrage that just how dare they even consider putting a picture of a dead American, never mind any of the people on the other side in the newspaper.
Yeah, the people in the media are contemptible, war-sucking scumbags who are betraying the very fundamental humanity that they claim to represent. By not broadcasting, by not showing, by not telling, they are Goebbels-ready propaganda hamsters. They are court toadies. They are unbelievable agents to genocide and mass murder. I mean, the mainstream media is just such a bunch of over-perfumed, bouffant, over-made-up human zombie Barbies and Kens that in the future it will be absolutely astounding when they look back through the tunnel of time and see the joking and the laughter and the hanging out on couches and the absolute amount of hysterical and giddy perfume that they're pouring over the stench of these rotting bodies around the world. It's absolutely appalling, and it's absolutely unbreakable. It is an absolute iron wall of protection around the bloodthirsty tyrants at top.
Yeah. Well, it certainly protects Americans from the images, but now over there in the Middle East, it seems like, well, in most of the cases, well, it's not in the Middle East. In the so-called Muslim world, it's 25 countries or something where these protests are going on now. I wonder what you think that means for the future of the American empire over there. Is this it sort of seemed like, and I don't know whether you agree with this, but it seemed like at the beginning of the Arab Spring in 2011 that, well, it's going to take a while and it's going to hurt like hell, but there's no going back now. Eventually, these people will have some semblance of self-government, some semblance of independence from the empire. I wonder whether you think that this is a big step on that path or not, or anything along those lines.
I mean, look, the average Muslim on the street rioted because the price of wheat doubled. And 40% of people in Egypt are living on $2 a day or less. So when the price of wheat doubles, you run out of food. And when you run out of food, you start becoming desperate. The Arab Spring had nothing to do whatsoever with any kind of philosophical revolution. It had nothing to do with any grasp of first principles of philosophy, of the Declaration of Independence, of Western values, nothing to do with any of that. It was starving people who were rioting, and then it was harnessed by intellectuals with a grudge, and it was funded, of course, from outside. So this had nothing to do with any kind of movement. I mean, the Arab world as a whole, and the Western world has a lot to do with this. I mean, the Arab world is stuck in medieval pre-Reformation religious hysteria. I mean, this is just a fact. They have not had their Reformation. They have not had their internal squabbles about doctrine that lead towards things like the Renaissance, to the Enlightenment, to what they would consider, what we might consider a property-based industrial revolution. I mean, they're way back, and they're way back not because there's something wrong with the Arab mind or the Arab world. They're way back because they are rich in resources, and we happen to develop gunpowder ahead of them. So that's the basic reality. And so the Arab Spring had nothing to do with any democratic movement, nothing to do with, I mean, obviously they want to be free. All human hearts that aren't completely corrupted yearn for freedom. But the idea that the Arab Spring was going to lead to some wonderful flowering. I mean, the wonderful flowering of the human spirit takes the dedicated and extremely dangerous work of literally thousands of sung and unsung intellectuals, usually over hundreds of years. I mean, think of how long it took. Plato was against slavery, and a mere 2,500 years later, we managed to scrub it off the human face. There were people who were against, who were for rights for women in the ancient world. It took 2,000 years for that. Even when the Quakers began the abolitionistic movement to end slavery, it still took 150 to 200 years and huge amounts of bloodshed and so on. Human prejudices, human bigotry, human ignorance, human superstition is so deeply pounded into children. They grow up with their brains formed in this very way. To change that requires a massive, unending amount of human sweat, strain, and tragically often blood. And none of this happened in the Arab Spring. They rioted over food. Everyone called it some sort of awakening to solve the guilty conscience of the West. We threw a couple of guns at them and some funding, and then we went right back to doing what we're doing in general, which is giving huge amounts of military aid to the dictatorships which rule over them, and suppressing and quashing any move towards any kind of regime change that might threaten our access to their resources. So it's the same old story of empire, but I mean, the American empire is toast anyway. I mean, it's I don't think it'll be more than 10 or 15 years before the bases, they're just going to collapse like powder. I mean, it's the same thing happened to England after the Second World War. Same thing happened to Rome at the end of the Roman Empire. It's a house of cards. It's built on debt and enslavement and counterfeiting and lies and brutality and violence and the greedy slurping of shallow entertainment by the traumatized hordes behind the biodome. So it's all going to crumble and fade. I mean, what's going on now is just this massive grab fest before the whole, crap system comes down. I mean, this is what QE3 is all about. I mean, nobody's expecting another housing boom is going to solve the problem. And the Fed buying up $40 billion worth of housing securities and promising to keep interest rates at zero, thus punishing savers and anyone who's got any kind of interest-bearing equities. I mean, this is just an admission that the whole crap house is coming down and everyone's just grabbing as many bags of silver as they can to sprint out.
All right. Now, as far as, Reformation in the Middle East and all that, you might think I'm utopian and silly, but, being the libertarian that I am, I want to sell everyone on libertarianism. And I felt this way before the war on terror and all of this, this century's, cranking up of this horrible foreign policy. And in the name of, Wolfowitz's, freedom agenda doctrine and what have you and all that. And it seems to me like, right now, especially technology wise and all that in the 21st century, that the kind of backwards and ossified parts of the Muslim world would never be able to withstand the onslaught of free domain radio, on a regular basis, except for the fact that the American government is going around claiming your ideas, obviously very watered down, but claiming to believe in the individual liberty that you're describing while they kill everybody. And it seems to me like, especially when in the Middle East, this last decade and this time right now, you have super majorities of the populations of most of these states are under the age of 30. And you know how young people are idealistic and interested and open, and there's plenty of evidence to show, like at the minaret of freedom, that Islam and libertarianism and individualism are perfectly compatible philosophies and ways of looking at the world. And so it seems to me like we could have been making a whole lot of progress in spreading the Enlightenment to that part of the world, except that our government has made it that much more difficult by polluting and poisoning our message with their depleted uranium.
In the scattershot of thoughts, and I'm certainly not complaining since I'm doing the same. I mean, there was a number that I agreed with and a couple that I disagreed with. The one where you say that Islam is perfectly compatible with libertarian philosophy, perhaps you can explain that one to me a little bit more. I must have tripped up on that one a little bit because I may not see it the same way.
Well, I sure don't know, everything there is to know about Islam, but it is, like Christianity, it's based on a personal acceptance of it, right? Not whether your town is saved, but whether you are or not, your own personal relationship on an individual basis with the monotheistic God, as opposed to some of the other ways of looking at things. So, I would recommend you to Dean Ahmed at the Minaret of Freedom. He's got a lot to say about it, and he's a real good libertarian,
Well,
but really,
go ahead.
Okay, so even if let's say, for example, that they're just opposites, that they're just not compatible, well, that you really have to have a more, reason-based secularist outlook to really even believe in liberty. Still, we could be doing a lot better to, in that sense, water down fundamentalist Islam in favor of a more reasonable Islam that actually could be compatible with Enlightenment ideas. Same sort of argument.
Well, when you say we, do you sort of mean the states, the powers that be, the political masters?
Well, no, I guess I just mean, especially the libertarian populations of the West. We're the ones who understand all this stuff right in the first place. If we're going to, export the philosophy, we better start with, some kind of libertarian.
Sorry, did you have more to say? Did you cut out?
No, I guess I just wanted to make sure you understood. No, I didn't mean I want the state spreading liberty. I'm saying when the state kills people and calls it spreading liberty, that makes it that much more difficult for people who do want to spread liberty. Because after all, what does it cost to spread Molyneux podcasts all over the Middle East? Nothing. I mean, you could put the entire ethics of liberty and John Locke's second treatise on civil government and whatever you want on an iPod and send it over there for 45 cents.
Well, yes, but of course the barrier in a lot of these countries is that apostasy is punishable by imprisonment or death, right? So deconverting from Islam is a capital offense. Bloggers who've simply questioned religion have been on the run for their lives. And the film stars have had to flee and go live in Paris. Not exactly the worst punishment in the world, but human beings are very powerfully ruled by force. It takes only a few examples, and we are very powerfully ruled by force. Our biological imperative is to survive and reproduce, not to be, heroic shadow stains on the wall of freedom from the Gestapo boots of historical inevitability. So in the Middle East, I don't consider it to be a very sort of freedom-friendly environment, because there are so many laws that are compelling at least outward professions of piety that, I mean, I certainly do have some listeners in the Middle East, but it's, it's a hard thing. I mean, like, I only hope that I get caught with porn and not philosophy, because that
Yeah.
could explain
Well,
porn away.
like you said, though, a lot of this has to do with America supporting their tortured dictators for all these years, for generations now, and the Brits before us. Of course, the CIA funneled Saddam Hussein and his buddies all the lists that they needed of, anybody nearsighted. Round them up and kill them, and we'll make sure that nobody could ever explain to any neighborhood full of Iraqis why they ought to not have to live like this, So
yeah, and of course,
it's not like they never had intellectualism there. It's just the CIA killed them all.
Yeah, and then there was this embargo, which, I mean, caused Saddam Hussein to become even wealthier. I mean, I was reading just unbelievably terrible stories about the results of this in the 90s. The U.S. and UK-led sanctions against, I mean, it stripped medicine, it stripped healthcare, it stripped food, it stripped anything you could imagine. I mean, one boy's father in Iraq had to hold his son down while his son's leg was amputated without anesthetic, because they simply could not. I mean, can you imagine? You can't imagine. I can't imagine the amount of horror. Millions of Iraqi children dying for lack of access to basic health care. And, our media, because we're so removed and we live in this bubble, our media can hide this from us because it's so far away. But you can't hide the war from its victims. I mean, they just have to look out the window. They just have to march past the plots of graves in their backyard. They just have to look at the X's on their family tree. They just have to look at the hat hung on a wall from a guy whose head rolled off his head from a sniper and never came home. So they can't, even if they want to, they can't avoid the effects of the war and the blockade and the propping up of these dictatorships. They live in fear, they live in abject rage, and they live in frustration, and they live in they know as well, they know very clearly that we're not, for the most part, aware or seeing anything that is going on. They see us highly concerned with how many red and yellow balloons are there available to float up in the candidate. They get translations of the candidate's speeches if they can't speak English, and they know that the wars aren't even being mentioned in the presidential race. There's not a whiff or a word of the longest-running wars in American history. You can't talk about it, you can't see anything about it, but they can't avoid it. And then we act completely bewildered as to why there might be all these problems.
Yeah, well, hey, at least we have that going for us, that they watch American TV on the satellite and say, oh, well, no wonder the Americans do this to us all the time. They have no idea what their government is really doing over here. Maybe that'll save us a little bit.
We have no excuse for not knowing what is going on over there. We have no excuse. I mean, I could understand when I was a kid, there were like 2 news stations that you could get, and the rest of the dial was just static. And so it was, you couldn't get foreign newspapers. You couldn't get foreign perspectives. You didn't have the internet. So you could understand how people were able to break out of the bubble even in Vietnam. Even in Vietnam, towards the end, you began to actually see the casualties. It took 7 or 8 years for the anti-war movement to really, have an effect, and it took really the broadcast of the information coming back. But even in the bubble of the 1960s, you could get that information across. I mean, if I were in the Muslim world, I would look at the Americans and say, you people have zero excuse. It's 1 click away. Iraqi bodies, images, done. It's 1 click away. That's all you need to do. And I would just be very aware of every second of every single person's day that passed that they were not doing that. And I would not be able to hold them innocent.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Well, I'm an aberration because that's all I want to talk about all day long. That's all I want to interview anybody about all day long is the very worst thing in the whole world, America's Pentagon's behavior. I mean, what the hell else is there that's important to talk about? I just don't get it. And I'm almost alone. I appreciate you showing up. You make me not feel so bad.
Oh, it is. It's completely mad. I mean, it's completely mad that these atrocities are going on all over the world, and people, it's like, It's like that line in the old song, um, "Don't Dream It's Over," where they say the newspaper tells of war and of waste, but you turn right over to the TV page. I mean, this is back in the day when newspapers used to talk about war and waste, and the newspapers wonder why they're losing so much money. It's because they have, I mean, there's no credibility. You know, I've got a radical business plan for the mainstream media. How about a radical business plan called Tell the Truth? The important truth, the truth that matters to people, the truth that has an effect on people. Don't just cover up all the crimes. Don't spend your entire janitorial days sweeping the bones under the rug for the crunch of the politicians' heels as they walk to a podium to describe yet another new glorious plan for making the world a better place. How about you just stop draping flags all over the coffins and then blowing the coffins and flags into deep space where nobody can see them? Just lift the lid a little bit on what is going on outside the matrix, and we'd all be a lot better off. But of course, looking for that kind of courage in the mainstream media is looking for a mohawk on my bald scalp. It's just kind of a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what it is about me. I'm just desperate for a silver lining tonight, and I'm thinking that, one thing is, you couldn't be more right about the way you portray the mainstream media and just how far off their narrative is from the real world. And the silver lining there is that when people realize that, it's shocking. It hits them like a ton of bricks all at once. Holy crap, have I been living in a fantasy world if I thought that, well, I don't know who does the news anymore, but my example is always, if I thought that Brokaw would correct Rather, I was wrong. They don't check each other at all. They don't protect us from each other at all. Oh my goodness, there must be some important point of view here I'm not being exposed to. It mattered to me. I'll give you an example. When I first heard of Branch Davidian on an AM talk radio show, and it occurred to me that, like, oh my God, there are Branch Davidians who are alive and have things to say. Now, there's something that TV never, ever, ever, ever gave me. Even the realization that, like, they would be there saying things if only there was the invitation. Never even occurred to me. And yet here they are. Some of them still live, and some of them don't quite agree with what TV had to say about their situation. That could be a real important thing to kind of shake the hell out of somebody and get them to realize.
The silver lining is we may be denied the absolute reality of the evils that are being committed in our name and with our enforced money. But the important thing to remember, Scott, is, and I think we can all take some relief in this, we do have endless exposure to slideshows of the sartorial style evolution of Michelle Obama's personal wardrobe choices and the price of each dress. We do have comparisons between the amount of money spent on Ann Romney's dress and the amount of money spent on Michelle Obama's dress, because that is the really, really important stuff. That is the stuff that is going to have real impact. Or, as has happened to Mitt Romney when he was giving a private speech to 30-odd high-level donators recently, somebody videotaped it. He actually said, well, 47% of the people don't pay federal income taxes, and they're kind of dependent on the Democrats to keep shoveling money through social programs at them, so they're not going to be available to us as a voting base. And, of course, the left-wing media goes completely insane and characterizes this, and they don't actually provide any facts. Like, nobody actually says, well, is this true or is this false? Do the Democrats have a history of appealing to people who are more dependent on government? Well, of course they do. I mean, of course they do. Why do you think 99.9%, to round up a little, of money from public sector unions goes to Democrats and not to Republicans? I mean, this isn't even guesswork. This isn't even, you'd have to have your head so far up your ass you're seeing out your own throat to miss this. So he's saying something that is kind of true. Republicans appeal more to the entrepreneurial types than to more of the private sector types. The military-industrial
The only thing that he did wrong, really, I thought, was the lie by omission, where he forgot to mention all the billionaires that are on welfare, too.
Of course. They can't talk about the wealthy who are on welfare. Because that's not their gig, right? And I understand that, but that's not what the media is saying. What the media is saying is, this is shocking, this is appalling, this is really bad for his campaign. I can't believe he said that.
But not even why.
It's like, but is it true or not? Nobody cares.
Or not even why it should be shocking at all,
Society. Sorry?
All right, well, listen, we're overtime here. It's been great talking with you. We should do it again soon. Everybody, Stefan Molyneux, Free Domain Radio. And is it youtube.com/freedomainradio?
It sure is.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate talking to you again.
Thanks, man. Just for your listeners, too, if you have a chance to come out, check out libertopia.org. I'll be doing 3 days of speeches and emceeing and maybe even singing with a band over in San Diego. So people will check out libertopia.org, and I'll be speaking in November the 3rd in Toronto at Liberty Fest North. So thanks so much, Scott. It's a real pleasure chatting with you. I hope we can do it again soon.
Okay, right on. Take it easy.
Take care.
Stefan Molyneux, everybody. Free Domain Radio. And by the way, next Monday, I'm giving a speech in Madison at the University of Wisconsin at Madison for the Young Americans for Liberty there with Anthony Gregory. He's doing domestic police state stuff, and I'm going to cover the foreign policy for you. So if you're anywhere near Wisconsin, see you there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to Ian for the opportunity to host this show. And I will see you next Tuesday. Should be back. I will see you guys next Tuesday. Oh, by the way, my regular radio show is noon to 2 on noagendastream.com. All right? See you later.